In this video, I want to show you how to refactor some controller stuff into models. Because as you may know, MVC principle goes with saying that controllers should be as short as possible. It shouldn't contain any logic, and one of the places where the logic can go is models. And eloquent models have quite a lot of features, properties, and various tricks where to put that logic. The first way to refactor controller into model is accessors and mutators, and this will be the example. And this is the form to create users, and one of the field is birth date. And birth date format is a little different than in the database. So for example, if we put this month, day, and year in the database, it should be year, month, day, as in MySQL column. So we need to change the format on saving and on showing. So in the code, if you do that in controller, in store method, it probably looks something like this. So you get the request and then you specify that birth date of different formats. So create format from Carbon using Carbon library and then formatting it into year, month, and date. So that works. Let's show. Test something, and that is the date. Okay, and that is saved fine, and that's another thing I want to show you. So in the database, let's refresh. In the database, it is saved in year, month, date. The second part is showing, actually. And showing is related to blade. So in index blade file, you'll probably do something like this. So parsing the date and then formatting it back to month, day, year, or doing birth date as dates field in the eloquent and then formatting it here still. So the correct way or more convenient way to hide that logic is to have accessors and mutators. So these are two functions. I've commented them out. Now let's put them back and delete this one and delete this one and leave only the actual field. So this is much cleaner. So controller doesn't contain any logic of formatting. Blade doesn't contain any logic of formatting either. And the whole formatting goes here. So to set birth date attribute, there's a mutator, which does pretty much the same thing, but within eloquent. And with getting the birth date, again, it's doing the same thing, parsing and formatting. Let's try it out, how it works. In the form, actually I have a form filler here, so it should work, except for this probably. Yep, that should work. Birth date, 86, good. Submit, and we do have that 86. So it works, but it's much more elegant to have that in accessors and mutators than in controller and blade file. Another way to move the logic from controller into model is called query scopes, eloquent query scopes. Let's have an example. We have two pages, list of users and list of birthdays. And let's say in both cases we need to filter this year's users. And if we do that in controller, it looks something like this. So in both methods, in controllers, we filter where year, and that where year is identical, it's the same. So instead of doing that in various places in controller, in our example, it's two cases, but it may be more than that. Let's put that into scope, so-called scope. So this is a method inside of your eloquent model. Scope, let's call it born this year. And all you do is just add some condition to the query, which is the same condition as in controller. And in controller, you change this to born this year. And you repeat the same thing here. And it allows not only the controller to be shorter, but also it changes the logic into model where you can change it in one place. So don't repeat yourself, dry principle. Right, so born this year, let's test it if it still works. A list of users. It works and it shows 3 entries, and list of birthdays didn't change, so it works well. Now, there's more to that. You can add parameters. So for example, if you want to change that to born year and pass a parameter, for example, this year, You can do that as well. So this is how it will look, date Y. And then we change the name from born this year to born year. Add a parameter here, so year, and change this to that parameter. And let's see if it returns the same results. Birthday list still works, same results, and users, same results. So that is another way to even add parameter here. And also you can do, this is called local scope, which you use directly on the controller whenever you need that. There's also a function called global scope, which is usually used in multi-tenancy application, where you can filter the data by, for example, by user ID, who is logged in, or company ID of that user, or something like that. Then you register the scope in the model. I won't show you that example, but I wanted to show you example of how to move the logic from the controller into the model with help of scopes. Next way, how to move the logic from controller into model, into Eloquent model, or in fact Eloquent model observer. That's what I want to show you today in this video, in this part of the video. So here's an example. If we store a user, so from this form we want to create a user and we want to do something after it's created. So log the event or send some notification, send email. So for this example, it will be just logging into Laravel log file, which is info helper. So user registered, user email, nothing fancy. If we submit the form, I'm showing that with form filler with Chrome extension. So we have new entry, and in Laravel log we have this. So info, user registered, and with our exact email. That is fine, but how to move that away from controller to somewhere else? For that we can use observer. So user observer, you just artisan command generates that for you. So make observer user observer, and you specify the model, and you have some things to choose from. So what events you want to tackle: created, updated, deleted, and others. So in this case we are doing the created stuff. So when user is created, then we're doing the same email. Actually, let's change that from observer, and then we delete that entry. Also, to use the observer, we want to register that in app service provider. You do this line, and of course include use app user and use observer. And let's see how it will work this time. Add user, again fill in the form with form filler, choose appropriate values, birth date, and submit. No errors here, and let's look at our Laravel log. User registered from observer. So this is what we wanted to achieve, to move away the logic from controller into model, or in fact into model observer. And final thing I want to show you in this lesson is not how to move away logic from controller into Eloquent, but how to use Eloquent more elegantly and in shorter way. So you want to use some Eloquent magic, I call it magic, some methods that make your code shorter if you do that in controller. And I have two examples. It's pretty kind of fake examples, and we won't run this code, but still you will see the difference. So often I see some code of this, so finding some, I don't know, value, some record, and in case of failing, abort with some code. So there's a function for that, find or fail. There's also first or fail, and quite a few Eloquent methods with or. with or. So find or fail will show you the same 404 page if this record isn't found. And another example of similar method is checking if the user exists. For example, we want to check if the user exists, and if it does exist, then we update the record, and if it doesn't exist, then we create the record. And this is much a shorter way without any if statements. Update or create is Eloquent method, where you just pass the first parameter what to look for, and in case of update, what to update to. So these are two examples of how to make your controller method shorter by using some eloquent magic methods or functions that are kind of less documented. In this lesson, I want to show you how to deal with your controllers and specifically extra methods in your controllers. Because by default, Laravel offers so-called resourceful controllers. So you can do artisan make controller -- resource, and you get the controller with typical 7 methods. And I have a demo project with those methods already implemented. With our quick admin panel, it's generated partly. So you have list, so index, create, store, edit, update, show, and destroy. So 7 methods which are typical for so-called CRUDs. So create, read, update, and delete. Now, what if you want to have another function, another method, another action for something? So for user list, typical example would be approval of user. And from Laravel 5.7, we have a field for email verification, so email verified at, which is nullable or null or timestamp. And what if you want to approve user manually? So not verify the email by user themselves, but you want to approve that from admin. So technically, you should, one way, straightforward way of doing that is public function approve user ID. Then you get to user find or fail, probably find or fail user ID, and then user update email verified at equals now to datetime string. I think that would work. And then you redirect redirect to route. In our case, it is admin users index. So that would be the typical Laravel controller method for approve. And how do you specify that in routes? So in our web, we have that resource controller, and probably that would be get users user ID approve to user controller approve method. Now, keep in mind, be careful with those extra methods and specify them before the resource, because if you do that, this probably will work, but if you do this one, for example, user approve or something, that is the same URL as resource show method, so get users ID. So be careful that it could be overwritten. So in our case, we need to specify extra methods before the resource, and that would work. And actually, I want to show you 3 methods how to deal with those extra methods, extra controller methods. So approve and typical function is one way, kind of the most straightforward one. Another one would be to try to tie those methods to existing ones. So technically, what is an approve? It's actually an update. So instead of doing the approve, you would get the approval function to reference something like, so instead of that, it would be post, or actually put method to admin users ID, something with parameter email verified at equals now something. So that would be the URL, the calling, and then it would probably do the same. So probably we will need to specify this, since in this project we also have roles. So probably you would need to specify, so if not request email verified at, then do role syncing. So that would work, and it would update only one field, which is exactly what we need. That would be skipped and then redirect back to user list. So whenever you think about something custom in controller, try to think how to tie that to existing methods, whether it's store or update. What is the typical similar action? And that goes back to one presentation, one Laracon talk by Adam Wathan called Cruddy by Design. I will link that in the description of this video. And it's a good talk. I'm not sure I totally agree with that philosophy, but it goes that controller should be as short as possible. And for this specific action, you should create more controllers. So for that case, you would create a user approval controller, and that method would be update on user approval. And so every controller actually would be only CRUD. So by definition, there should not be methods like approve. Instead, it should be one of those CRUD methods in a separate controller. This way you will have a lot of controllers, and that philosophy goes from Basecamp guys. I'm not sure if you're familiar with that software company, and they have like hundreds of controllers in their application, which is Ruby on Rails, not Laravel, but still same MVC. So hundreds of controllers, and average amount of methods in controller is like 2 or 3. It's not even 4, it's not even 7. So it's really small amount of methods, but they're all basically CRUDs. So that's the idea behind Adam Wathan's video. I encourage you to watch that all, and it actually goes through refactoring of similar type of application. It's about podcasting. So for example, subscribing to podcast is actually inserting, so creating, storing data into pivot table. So it should be a pivot table controller specific. I think it's called podcast subscriptions controller, and then storing store methods on that one. And final thing, if you have a controller with some one method, so for example, I don't know, show profile or something, there's a new thing in Laravel. Well, I think it is new. Laravel invocable controllers. Invocable. I've written an article about it on my blog Laravel Daily. So this, you can specify the controller with only one method called invoke, which does whatever you want. It can specify parameters, it can accept parameters, and then all you do is specify that controller without any specific method. So you can also create just controller for one specific action with one specific method called invoke, and you shouldn't tie then that action to those CRUDs. It's not it's not insert or create or store or index. It's just invoke some action, which would be like the name of your controller, then should be pretty clear about what you're doing with that controller. So these are kind of my tips on how to structure controllers. I agree with Adam Wathan that they should be short, including the amount of methods on controller. Probably you should tie extra methods for controller into specific existing methods, or create more controllers kind of to separate the concerns. And also it helps for readability, because shorter controllers are more readable. It's much clearer, because there were a few times in my career I started working on a project from another team. The project was already ongoing for a year or two, and I open up the code base for the first time and I see controller with like 2,000 rows. It's impossible to understand that. But if you have the controller methods divided by separate controllers with small amount of methods, and even better with shorter code, which we'll dive deeper into this course later, then it's much more readable and much more structured, and probably easier to navigate and to edit and to maintain. In this video we will talk about structure of blade files, and specifically the whole project divided into blade partials, includes, extends, and all of that. I just want to show you my vision how I usually do that with a real example. I will live code some things, and maybe you have different vision, but in general it will show you look and feel how you can structure the blade. So as an example, I've taken admin panel, well, not admin panel, it's actually color admin with front end theme, which I just got from one client for their project. And it's example of HTML with CSS with everything. And what I want to show you is 2 pages. So we have index.html here for the blog, and we have about me page. What I want to do here is put that HTML into Blade, into fresh Laravel, instead of this one. So that would be step number one, HTML into Blade. And then divide that Blade into special partials for the blocks that are repeating. So this header, this menu, this sidebar, the footer, and this will be our content. And lastly, we will try to specify the variables that are needed into those blades. So let's begin. We have that index.html, and I have that code opened in Sublime, the whole folder for all the pages. And let's, first step, we copy that HTML and paste into our Laravel, which is totally fresh project, into our resources, views, welcome blade, which comes from Laravel by default. So this is our welcome blade, and probably it will break when we reload the page because the assets are not in there. It's loading, but it's probably, yeah, it shows a lot of 404s for all the JavaScript, CSS, and it shows the texts. Well, it's kind of working. What we need now is look at what assets are here. So all assets are referenced as folder above, and in the original theme it's actually like this. So we have template blog, and folder above we have assets. A lot of assets with plugins. I don't want to go deeper what assets are. Let's do it this way. We copy all the assets into public folder of our Laravel project. For simplicity, we will avoid any compiling, any npm stuff, just copy all the assets. And in our welcome blade, let's replace this to with, wait, Control F, what is the replace, find replace, wait, edit, find replace, yeah. So we will replace this one with just core folder, save, and now let's refresh our page. Yay, we have our page loaded with all the CSS and JavaScript, but for now it's a static HTML. So it's welcome blade, and now let's create another about blade. Actually, let's copy that. No, actually first let's divide all that thing. Actually, welcome blade will be extends, let's call it layouts front, and layouts front will be a new blade file in, so view, new directory, layouts, because there will be two layouts. Let's say in this case will be front and admin. So front blade PHP, and we copy all of that into front. So everything into front. So that would be kind of the main front, the main layout for any page. And inside of this welcome, we will have a section called content, and section or stop. I prefer and section for clarity. And what is the actual content here in our case? The content is this here. So div content container. To do that, we open about me, and let's see what part is repeating here. So footer, content here, page title, begin content, trying to begin post list. So probably this part is different. So up till here it should be a layout, and actually no, it's repeating elsewhere. Search. Actually, it is the sidebar. So this is the sidebar. Call 9 is the actual content, and call MD3 is the sidebar. So we repeat in our blade files. I hope you're following me. I'm doing a lot of things on the fly. So this will be our content. Instead of front blade here. So this one, the whole block until here will be content. Yield content. So this will be the block, and in our welcome blade we specify section of content as this one. And now we can specify the about page, because now we know what the content is. So let's do save as welcome blade about blade, and we will reuse the same font, but the content will be different. So instead of all of that, we will replace that with about me HTML with this part. And it's much shorter, as you can see. So we don't have post list, we have just about me section, and we replace that one. Okay, and what we need is a route. So route get is welcome, and route about is about. And let's open our, first let's test if it's still working. Yep, the home page is okay, and now let's click about. As you can see, it's working perfectly. Nothing is broken, so this part is actually the content. Now, what I want to avoid is repeating. So the front blade should be pretty small with a lot of includes. That's what I'm doing usually. Is so this part, wait, so this part content, this part should be sidebar. So we put all of this into include, layouts, partials, sidebar, or actually probably partial sidebar. That would be, it's not a layout. So new directory partials and new file sidebar blade PHP with all of that content. And same goes with footer, begin footer copyright, and we don't need theme panel because it's a demo. We don't need that demo, that thing. I will show you this one. So we don't need this one. So we will delete that completely, and then create a new partial footer blade PHP, paste that, footer. Let's refresh the page to make sure it's still working with all the sidebar and footer. Homepage, we see sidebar. Footer is actually gone because probably we didn't include it, of course. Include partials footer. Refresh. Okay, the page is structured. So what we have at this point, we have pretty good front blade with the assets. If you want to, you can specify this one as similar header blade PHP partial. Basically divide that even more into more includes, but I don't want to do that in this lesson. It would be too long then. What I want to focus now is how to pass parameters into that blade. So for example, how to specify that title to be different for any blade, for any page. And for that we probably will use controllers now. So let's generate some controllers. Artisan make controller, home controller. It will be one controller with two methods. Okay, home controller, and it will be public function index, return view welcome, and then public function about with view about. And then it makes sense to replace that home controller index and home controller about will be about. Now, how we specify the parameters here in our index. So for example, title home page. We specify that as a parameter. We specify this here as a variable. And in here, let's put about page and also pass that as a parameter. Title, something like that. And now, since about and welcome both extend layouts front, here we can specify color admin. Let's put color admin, and then this part will be actually the parameter. The parameter could be title, but to make it more specific, to avoid the same variable somewhere, we call it page title. Page title. Page title should be good. And here we have page title or empty. And let's try it out. Oh, you don't see that because I've hidden that part of the browser. So let's see the source. The source is homepage and about page. It's about page, and if we don't specify that, for example, if it's empty, so we don't specify any variable for some page, it should not throw any errors. It should still work, but without title. Right, it's empty. Notice that the function of this thing works only since Laravel 5.7, I think, because that syntax came with PHP 7.1 from what I remember, or 7.0. So basically in the latest version, so if you have Laravel 5.4 or something, it won't work. So this is a simple structure, how I structure the pages. It could be even more complicated, so this title and all of the parameters, for example, for sidebar, could be even more complex. And for that, you probably would use view composers or some other layer that would pass all the variables there. But we will get to view composers in future lessons of this course. In this lesson, I want to talk to you about base models and base controllers. If you want some parts of your application to be kind of the core, which extends the default behavior of your controller or your model, it's done pretty easily. Let's start with the controller. I've just done a fresh Laravel project, so totally fresh, totally new. I just made make auth to log in, which generated home controller for me. Home controller is the page that you see here, and it's really simple, just viewing the home. And it has constructor to protect the middleware auth. Now, what does it extend? This extends controller is actually this controller, which is also publicly available for us in app HTTP controllers. It's really empty. And then it also extends base controller, which is even further there, routing controller. So what we can do here, for example, in our controller, we can define some variable. For example, that's just a typical, non-typical, but really simple example. For example, you want to have variable, let's call it protected IP address of a person, right? And then in the base controller, you can define construct method, construct public function construct, where you define that IP address. So this IP address would be equal to request IP. Right, so you set it here in your base controller. Well, it's called controller, but I call it base controller actually. So your main controller. And then in your home controller, in construct, if you call parent construct, actually we can remove it altogether. So construct isn't really necessary in this case. Unless in index, let's do info this IP address. So as you can see in your actual home controller or in whatever controller you generate, if it extends your controller, it will automatically kind of, what's the right word? It will inherit all the variables or functions that you put here in construct. And let's try it. Let's refresh our home controller. So no errors here, and we should have Laravel log file, which logs my IP address from Homestead. So this is how you override something in your base controller and then use it in your whatever controller you have. Similar with your base model, you can create one if you want some logic to be available in all models. So by definition, by default, we generate the model. We do make artisan make model, and this is how it looks. So base product model without any other properties. And what is a model? A model is a class of Laravel framework, so it's inside of vendor and it's not available to us publicly. So that's the difference between model and controller. But we can create one. For example, let's do save as. So instead of product, it will be base model, right? So we open the base model. We rename that to base model, and in here, let's do something like let's define some function. Function get uppercase table name of that model, for example, right? Okay, and we return uppercase from this get table. Okay, so that get table is inside of model, inside of vendor, and we define our own function which extends the model into base model. And in product, we extend not the model, but our own base model. And we don't need that anymore. This remains empty. And now let's somewhere else in our controller, for example, in home controller, we do this. So product, let's instantiate product. This table is empty for now. I didn't add anything for this example, and I'll just log something. Product, and see, this function is already available to us. So get uppercase table name, and this is, if we refresh the page, okay, no errors, so we should have that in our log. Exactly, that's the uppercase table name of the model. So this is the way how you can define your base model, which extends the actual model. You can define any other variables or functions here, which will be available for all the other models, where you extend your base model instead of eloquent Laravel model. In this lesson, I want to talk to you about environment variables and configuration and env function. And I see quite a lot of people doing some mistakes in it and don't even notice. So this is the example, a fictional example. For example, in controller in store, you want to create a company and upload some files. And then you directly use env upload path here, which defines where to upload the files. And then in your .env file, you have something like this. So final result is public/company/thumbnails, for example. And then you upload the files. So it's not necessarily wrong, it would work, but it has a few drawbacks and a few flaws, and I will talk to you about that. First thing, what if you're working in a team and your teammates don't know that you have that variable in .env? Because .env is usually in gitignore and it isn't uploaded to the repository. So first thing you need to do, whenever you have the variable in .env, you should add that to file .env. .env.example. So this does apply and is uploaded to the repository and is seen by your teammates. And this is what you should do. So upload path, empty value, as it is here, for example, and in others, app key, for example, is empty. So it doesn't have any default value, but the teammate would know that they do have to have that variable here. And you could, of course, put companies here as a default value, but it wouldn't be taken to the application. So first thing you need to do is put env example. Next thing you should do is, instead of directly using env, you should use config. So in your config app PHP, for example, or in any other config that you may create, a separate config, you should actually choose some file upload, or for example upload folders array, and then main, actually companies, let's make it even more specific, so companies, and then you refer to that thing as config app upload folders companies, something like that, instead of this. So app is the file name, then upload folders, and then companies. That is good, but even better if that config has default value. So this is where you can go back and reuse that env upload path. Default is companies. So that is the correct way of doing that. So we're reusing this here instead of env. So any configuration value from controllers, models, services, or whatever class should use config function, which then checks the value here in the config. And here it is related to env and also has default value. So in this case, even if your teammates or your server doesn't have that env, there's a default value as a fallback. And actually everywhere in Laravel file you should take a notice, you will see these. So in default Laravel application, when you do Laravel new or compose a create project, it's everywhere. Everything is in config and it does use env. So for example, app name, this one is Laravel, but actually in the code it is used as config app name. Actually, let's test it. I think it is in resources, views, layouts, app. I think it is here. This. So in the blade file, this is how it looks, and it has actually, even here, it has a default value as a fallback. But everywhere you should use config instead of putting env directly in controller model or even view. And another thing, final thing, why you should use config and why you shouldn't use env is caching. So if we go to Laravel documentation, specific section about configuration caching is you can do config cache to, well, give your application a speed boost, as Taylor writes, but really important notice is if you execute that, you should be sure that you're only calling env function from within configuration files. So if you're calling env from controllers, it isn't cached. So that's the whole point of moving everything into config, then calling from the controller only the config. Config may or may not use env variables, but then you can cache the config.